Welcome to our presentation of Disney's Cinderella. This very popular film actually contains many aspects to analyze historically, socially, and visually. A few things we will be looking at will include original written variants of Cinderella that influenced the film, how different cultures and social issues impacted the tale of Cinderella, and analysis of visuals in the film such as color, context, and human body. We hope that you will find this presentation both interesting and informative. Let's get started. Disney's Cinderella is based off Charles Perrault's variant Quadrille written in 1697. Charles Perrault was born to a wealthy bourgeois family and became an extremely prominent French author. His works are based on pre-existing French folk tales, along with some borrowed ideas from Italian literature such as the works of Straparola. Perrault's writings also had an impact on the works of the Grimm brothers over 100 years later. 17th century fairy tales began to become geared toward children and were directed toward the civiling process of young people and setting standards for behavior. This social phenomenon is apparent in Perrault's writings and also women writers of the salon culture. For instance, Cinderella's character is portrayed as humble, kind, and charming. The tale conveys the message that these attributes are admirable and will not go unrewarded. The writings of Perrault and women writers of the salons are also responsible for an influx of literary fairy tales in the 18th century that take a more definite shape in children's literature. Because Perrault's variant of Cinderella is one of the most popular and does not include any explicit violence as in other versions such as the Grimm's, it provided an excellent basis for Disney's film. While Disney's film is based off Perrault's variant, the Grimm brothers' version also impacted certain aspects of the film. Aschenputtel was published in the Grimm's folktale collection in 1812. Aschenputtel is more detailed than Perrault's version and includes some violent content such as self-mutilation when the stepsisters cut off parts of their feet to fit into Cinderella's slipper to attempt to marry the prince. For obvious reasons, Disney left out this part of the story. However, they did include animal helpers, which was first introduced in the Grimm's variant. In Aschenputtel, birds help Cinderella by granting her wishes and helping her to pick out the lentils from the ashes, as seen in the illustration on the left. They even cry out a little rhyme to the prince when he mistakes the stepsisters for Cinderella, and pecks out the eyes of the stepsisters at the end of the story. Although the animals in Disney's Cinderella perform different actions than in the Grimm's variant, they still are considered animal helpers. The mice and birds sew her a dress for the ball, pictured below, and more notably, bring her the key to escape the room in which her stepmother has imprisoned her. Perrault and Grimm's variants are viewed as the two most influential in inspiring Disney's Cinderella. It is, of course, based on Perrault's variant, but as we can see, both variants have played an important part in the content of the film.
Social Historical Outline, Disney's Cinderella. Point 1. Magic is a main component in the variants of Cinderella. Cultural lens changes depending on the era the variant was written. Comforted by magic in many ways and forms, Gold Eyes the fish, birds, trees, or dolls, a vast array of godmothers are used. Notice many involved in nature. These very godmothers were meant to protect her from domestic abuse and the inheritance she was robbed of. This theme can be seen from variants from Perrault to Bastille, continued to Disney. Point 2. Social historical meanings changed over time and depended upon the author as well as the time era it was written. Used as a sermon in Germany by Gillier in 1510, it was used as a behavior manual explaining how children should be taught. Bastille wrote a Cinderella variant with the main goal of warning against childhood sins and as a manual on how to teach children. Grimm wrote for an Academia audience from 1812 to 1857. He started writing for children when his stories became popular. Grimm's set the bar for children's literature. Basile wrote his variant of Cinderella to make fun of royalty. He died during the Reformation of Italy. Point 3. Variants differ socially depending upon the era. Ye Xin, a Chinese Cinderella written in 850 AD, the oldest variant known, promoted a meek and dutiful place of a woman. This was a rise variant. Straparola variant, written in 1550 in Venice, Italy, focused on the rags to riches, or as also known, rise tales, promoting dreams come true. Basile included an element of regalism in his 1630 writings in Naples when he translated his variant into Neapolitan dialect. The European tales, in contrast, are mainly restoration-type tales. America, through Disney, focused on the rags-to-riches tale, giving it new life and meaning. Different writers had different goals in writing their variants of Cinderella, as we can see. Cinderella was originally written for an adult audience, which included domestic abuse, sexuality, and inheritance issues, which were taboo items. In this time era, it was more easily discussed through these stories. It was Disney who made Cinderella child-friendly.
In our analysis of space, we look at the scene where Cinderella has her clothes ripped off by her sisters and goes off to cry outside. And here we can see that Cinderella is right in the distance under the willow tree, whereas her friends, the horse, the dog, and the birds, are standing quite a distance away with a giant space in between them. This symbolizes the emotional distance between Cinderella and her support base, which is standing over here. Another way of looking at it is to see that the space occupied by the friends is much larger than the space occupied by Cinderella. And that, included with the great distance between the two, we can see that Cinderella is feeling very small and contained to herself, whereas her friends are willing to help but are unable due to the great distance created by the emotional separation. For our analysis of line, we look at the scene where Cinderella first meets the prince, and this is all seen through the eyeglass of the king's advisor. In the beginning, we can notice a foreshadowing. We can see that the prince and Cinderella form a pair of parallel lines. This indicates that the two are equal and will go forward in life together. These two lines are surrounded by the big circle of the lens, indicating the circle of life. Thus, we can see that the pair will fall in love and live together the rest of their lives. Analyzing the progression of the banister itself, we can see that it models Cinderella's own story. Here, where the banister meets the ground, it's a reflection of Cinderella's beginning as a servant to her stepsisters and stepmother. Slowly, as the banister moves up, it peaks near where the fountain is, and this indicates Cinderella's coming into power when she becomes a princess. After this, the banister plateaus, and this indicates the happily ever after experienced by the princess and the prince. It is very important to note, however, that the banister never leaves contact with the ground, And this shows that Cinderella is always humble. She always remembers her roots, and this is what allows her to achieve the greater heights in her life. We can analyze this scene from the view of deserving and desiring. Here we can see that the prince is able to represent power, and as such, he is bowing to Cinderella, indicating that Cinderella is the receiver of power. We can also note here that Cinderella angles away from that power, and this shows that she is not interested in it, and thus that demonstrates that she is most deserving of it, as she will not use it to her personal gain, but rather as she needs to in order to perform her duties as a princess. The lines created by the fountain, wall, and banister construct a very solid shape with no top. This indicates a strong foundation and limitless possibility. Looking forward, we can see that the shape of the prince and Cinderella forms a triangle, a very sturdy shape in geometry. Through this, it can be seen that the love of Cinderella and the prince will be strong, and their bond will have the strength to carry itself and the kingdom to limitless heights. From a girl crying on a bench alone, with a great emotional distance separating her from her friend group, which is also her support base, to a girl who is in a very stable environment and wielding power. The combination of the line and space analysis of these two scenes clearly shows the progression of someone who is in the depth of their despair, staying true to themselves and true to their own roots. And through this virtue, that person is able to wield power and still, being true to themselves, rid themselves of the oppression and conquer their enemies and come out winning.